Imagine sitting across from someone who has spent months, maybe years, mapping your precise psychological pressure points. They know what makes you flinch, what triggers your guilt, what keeps you up at 3 a.m., second-guessing your own sanity. They've built a custom operational manual on how to keep you off balance. Now picture the exact moment that entire manual becomes completely useless. Most people believe that when you defeat a high-level manipulator or a narcissist, you get a cinematic climax. You expect screaming, slamming doors, dramatic accusations, or a tearing down of the house. Movie scripts have taught us to look for explosive fury as the sign of victory. But real behavioral psychology tells us something very different. Rage isn't defeat. Rage is an active tactical maneuver. Rage is a sign that they still believe they can bend your emotional state to their will. When you trigger an explosive reaction, they are still operating under the assumption that if they turn up the heat high enough, you will eventually collapse, explain yourself, or back down. They are actively engaging with you. Real defeat looks completely different. It is subtle, silent, and fundamentally terrifying if you don't know what to look for. When you strip away a manipulator's leverage for real, their behavior doesn't turn loud, it undergoes a structural crash. Their vocal cadence shifts, their baseline body language flattens, their operational pattern drops into a defensive posture that most people mistake for peace, but is actually the cold, calculated phase of psychological retreat. If you miss these signs, you risk stepping back into the trap right at the moment you've won. You might mistake their sudden silence for resolution, or their dramatic pivot for genuine remorse, opening the door just wide enough for them to regain high ground control. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand the exact 4 nonverbal, verbal, and behavioral patterns that emerge when a narcissist realizes, deep in their subconscious, that their leverage over you is zero. You're going to learn how to read these baseline signals in real time, decode what their nervous system is actually doing under pressure, and ensure that when you win, you hold that boundary permanently. Let's skip the surface-level advice. We aren't talking about winning an argument or having the last word in a text thread. We are talking about the absolute structural defeat of a narcissistic dynamic. Right now, pay close attention. If you understand the 4 behavioral shifts we're about to break down, you will never again waste an ounce of emotional energy trying to defend yourself against a high-level manipulator. Most people spend decades locked in a cyclic loop with narcissists because they keep looking for normal human responses, like accountability, remorse, or open surrender. They wait for a white flag that is never coming. If you leave this breakdown early, you will fall into the exact trap 90% of people make, mistaking a temporary tactical shift for genuine peace, or misinterpreting their sudden coldness as your failure rather than your total victory. Stay with me through all 4 signs, because the final sign is where most people inadvertently hand all their power back right at the finish line. When a manipulator realizes their operational tactics are failing, when your emotional baseline remains completely flat in the face of their standard provocations, their nervous system experiences a system error. Watch their eyes and vocal pitch closely. Up until this point, they have been running an active protocol. Raised vocal inflection, animated hand gestures, calculated pauses designed to force you to speak, or intense, unblinking eye contact. But when defeat hits home, the energy required to maintain that performance vanishes instantly. You will observe what behavioral analysts call a flat affect. Their facial muscles go slack. The rapid blink rate slows down to a cold stare. Their tone drops into a low, monotone register. They stop trying to convince you. This isn't calm authority, it is emotional exhaustion. They have run through every operational routine in their playbook, and none of them return to hit. The mask doesn't slip off gracefully. It drops like lead because the cost-to-benefit ratio of maintaining it has officially hit zero. Before total disengagement occurs, a defeated narcissist executes a rapid-fire rotation of wildly conflicting behaviors. In the span of a single conversation, or 24-hour period, they will cycle through extreme confidence, manufactured crisis, exaggerated praise, and severe victimhood. Why? Because their brain is frantically running a diagnostic test on your psychological profile. If guilt no longer works, they shift to pity. If pity yields no response, they attempt charm. If charm fails, they create an artificial emergency to force you into an operational response. They are throwing key combinations at a lock that has just been completely rekeyed. When you observe this erratic cycling, do not get dragged into analyzing the content of what they are saying. Recognize the pattern for what it is, a desperate baseline search for any legacy boundary breach that still yields control. When direct leverage over you becomes completely impossible, a narcissist's operational field shifts from direct manipulation to narrative preservation. They know they cannot influence your internal state anymore, so they move to control the perception of the surrounding network. You will see an immediate spike in quiet, indirect communication with third parties, friends, family, colleagues, or shared social circles. This is not just gossip, it is a calculated damage control protocol. They construct a narrative where they were the ones who withdrew, they were the ones who set the boundary, or they were the victim of your sudden, unreasonable shift in behavior. When you see this happening, realize what it actually means. They have completely conceded the direct battlefield. They know they cannot step into the ring with you directly without losing ground, so they resort to building defensive fortifications through others. Your absolute refusal to engage with or correct their false narratives is the ultimate confirmation that their influence over your life is dead. This is the ultimate indicator, and it is the point where most people break down if they don't understand the underlying psychology. When a narcissist recognizes that you are truly, permanently unshakable, that your emotional state is no longer bound to their inputs, they do not attempt a slow resolution. They cut access instantly and completely. They step into a state of total behavioral coldness. To the untrained eye, this looks like they never cared, or that you meant nothing to them. But at a psychological level, it is a survival mechanism to protect their fragile self-concept from intense, unbearable shame. Contact with you now serves as a constant, vivid reminder of their powerlessness. Because they cannot tolerate that reflection, they must wipe your presence from their operational reality. They erase the target because they can no longer control the outcome. When you reach this stage and view their absolute silence not as rejection, but as their final surrender, you haven't just escaped the dynamic, you have completely dismantled it. When a manipulator encounters a wall they cannot breach, their immediate response isn't to walk away, it is to run an immediate diagnostic on what just failed. In normal human interaction, when someone realizes an argument is lost or that a boundary is firm, there is a gradual tapering off of intensity. People slow down, take a breath, or express genuine frustration. But in a high-level narcissistic dynamic, defeat doesn't produce a natural emotional curve. It produces a sharp, mechanical shift in baseline behavior that feels alien if you are paying attention. The moment you strip away their leverage, whether that leverage was your guilt, your need for approval, your fear of conflict, or your desire to fix the situation, their primary tactical weapon breaks instantly. Up until that precise moment, they were relying on a high-energy performance. That performance required active maintenance, modulating the volume of their voice to project authority, using wide or sudden body language to command the physical space. lean-ins to invade your personal proximity, and exaggerated facial expressions designed to evoke an automatic empathic or defensive response from you. All of those behaviors are costly in terms of energy, but they invest that energy because it yields a return in the form of your emotional reaction. The split second their subconscious registers that your internal baseline is completely unmoved, the return on investment drops to zero. That is when you witness the sudden, complete collapse of the performance. The most striking visual marker of this collapse is the immediate drop in their microexpressions. The facial muscles that were working to project righteous indignation, victimhood, or smug superiority simply go slack. Their eyebrows reset to a neutral, heavy position. The subtle tension around their mouth vanishes, leaving a flat, expressionless line. Their blink rate, which usually spikes during high-stress deceptive maneuvers or calculated hostility, slows down into an unblinking, cold stare. Their posture drops from an aggressive, forward-leaning stance into a rigid, defensive posture. This isn't a transition into peace or calm agreement. It is the physical manifestation of an operational crash. Along with the visual baseline shift comes a distinct acoustic change. Their vocal inflection drops out entirely. The tone that was moments ago sharp, dynamic, or layered with dramatic pause turns completely flat and monotone. They stop using strategic vocal pitch to emphasize points or induce panic. The speed of their speech often slows down drastically, not because they are thoughtfully processing the conversation, but because the active script they were running has been wiped clean. When you ask them a direct question during this phase, you won't get an elaborate defense or a fast counterattack. You will get short, clipped, low-energy answers delivered with zero warmth and zero hostility. Just complete, icy detachment. Most people misinterpret this micro-baseline crash. They see the sudden stillness and flat affect and assume they've pushed the person into deep reflection, sadness, or extreme shock. Some people even feel a sudden surge of guilt, mistaking this cold withdrawal for pain, which prompts them to step forward and offer comfort, effectively handing back the control they just won. In reality, this state is a desperate defensive maneuver designed to conserve energy while their nervous system processes the shock of complete powerlessness. They have realized that every emotional trigger in their toolkit has failed, and rather than risk further loss of control in real time, they lock down their outer presentation completely to shield their internal core from exposure. When direct power plays fail, a manipulator doesn't immediately accept defeat. They shift into a state of covert behavioral triage. Keynote number 2 centers on behavioral withdrawal and cold isolation, an operational phase that triggers the moment a narcissist realizes that frontline tactics can no longer breach your boundaries. When you cut off their emotional supply and remain completely unreactive to their standard triggers, you force a severe internal crisis. In their mind, any further direct interaction without guaranteed leverage risks exposing their vulnerability and lack of control. To protect themselves from this exposure, they initiate a sudden, calculated retreat. This is not the passive cool-off period seen in healthy conflict resolution, where two people step back to reflect, regain composure, and return with a desire to rebuild communication. This is a strategic, tactical withdrawal designed to preserve their remaining psychological power, insulate their ego, and begin building alternative lines of defense away from your direct view. The mechanics of this withdrawal begin with a sharp drop in direct communication. The constant stream of texts, calls, subtle check-ins, or microaggressions abruptly ceases. If you share a physical environment with them, their movement patterns shift drastically. They will walk past you in hallways without making eye contact, enter and exit rooms with absolute silence, and adopt a posture of profound, unapproachable isolation. When forced to interact out of basic necessity, their responses are stripped of all personality, humor, or engagement. They speak strictly in transactional, bare minimum terms, using a voice that carries no warmth and no overt malice, just a dense, deliberate coldness. This sudden atmosphere of detachment is carefully constructed to create a psychological vacuum. Because human beings are naturally wired to seek closure and repair relational ruptures, this sudden wall of cold silence is intended to make you feel uncomfortable, anxious, or uncertain about where you stand. Behind this cold wall, however, lies an imperative of self-preservation, the conservation of social status. When a narcissist loses control over how you see them, their top priority becomes managing how everyone else sees them. They recognize that if they remain engaged with you while powerless, you might openly call out their tactics, reject their demands, or demonstrate to onlookers that their influence has evaporated. Cold isolation serves as an immediate protective barrier. By retreating into silence, they prevent you from gathering further evidence of their unraveling and stop you from witnessing their loss of control. Furthermore, this isolation allows them to quietly step into the role of the wounded, mistreated party. They use their sudden, silent withdrawal to signal to outside observers that they are the ones taking the high road, they are the ones being pushed away, or they are the ones dealing with an unreasonable partner or colleague. It is crucial to understand what is happening inside their psychological baseline during this phase. The coldness you observe is not a sign that they have moved on with peace or clarity. It is the outer shell of intense shame and operational shock. A manipulator relies entirely on the assumption that they can predict and influence your emotional responses. When you break that predictability by holding your ground with complete calm, their primary model of reality collapses. The silent, isolated posture is their system's way of going into low-power mode to prevent a complete emotional shutdown in front of you. They pull back to assess the damage, gather intelligence on your new boundaries, and determine whether they should abandon the relationship entirely or re-engage later through indirect channels. When a manipulator accepts that they can no longer alter your internal state directly, their entire focus shifts outward. Keynote number 3 addresses the inevitable slander campaign, which is the immediate redirection of toxic energy from direct confrontation toward third-party projection. When your personal boundaries prove unshakable, the narcissist faces a devastating reality. They have lost the power to define who you are to your face. Because their internal identity depends heavily on external validation and maintaining a pristine public narrative, they cannot tolerate leaving the story in a state where they were defeated or exposed. To salvage their ego, they abandon the primary battlefield, the direct relationship with you, and quietly open up secondary fronts across your shared social, professional, or familial networks. This campaign is rarely loud or explosive at the start. It is almost always quiet, methodical, and designed to look completely innocent. Instead of launching wild, unbelievable accusations that might cause people to question their sanity, a defeated manipulator uses subtle third-party projection. They reach out to mutual friends, family members, or colleagues under the guise of deep concern, confusion, or emotional distress. They present themselves as the victim of your sudden, unexplained shift in behavior. They will drop carefully crafted phrases intended to plant seeds of doubt about your stability, such as expressing worry over how distant, cold, or aggressive you have allegedly become. By framing their narrative in terms of sadness and concern, rather than anger, they enlist unsuspecting third parties to do their emotional work for them, creating an indirect pressure system aimed right back at you. The core psychological objective of this lateral maneuver is twofold: narrative preservation and proxy control. First, it allows the narcissist to rewrite the history of their defeat. In their public version of events, they were not set straight, held accountable, or exposed. Rather, they were the ones who tried everything to make things work. They were the ones who had to protect themselves, and they were forced to step back from a toxic situation. Second, it serves as a desperate attempt at proxy control. They hope that by turning common acquaintances against you, or making you feel socially isolated, the surrounding pressure will force you to break your boundaries, reach out to defend yourself, and re-engage in an argument where they can attempt to regain control. Recognizing this sign for what it truly is requires understanding that the slander campaign is a monument to your victory, not your defeat. A manipulator only attacks your reputation when they have completely run out of leverage over your person. They move to destroy the perception of you only because they can no longer control you directly. The biggest mistake you can make when this campaign begins is attempting to chase down every false narrative, defend your character to everyone who listened to them, or confront the narcissist about their lies. Engaging in that defense pulls you back onto their tactical field and gives them the attention and emotional reaction they were originally starved of. When you allow their third-party projections to exist without offering an emotional defense or breaking your silence, you strip the slander campaign of its power, leaving the manipulator entirely alone with the lie they created to cover their defeat. Before total surrender takes place, a manipulator will almost always execute a phase of desperate escalation and boundary testing. Keynote number 4 examines this volatile, erratic behavioral spike, which serves as the narcissist's final effort to determine if any legacy emotional trigger still functions within your psychological profile. When a narcissist realizes their standard tactics are completely falling flat, their immediate reaction isn't quiet acceptance. It is a rapid-fire attempt to throw every available operational tool at your boundaries simultaneously. In behavioral analysis, this phenomenon is often referred to as an extinction burst, a temporary, dramatic surge in the frequency, intensity, and variety of targeted behaviors right before an ingrained pattern is permanently abandoned. Because their primary leverage has evaporated, they abandon logical consistency entirely and begin cycling rapidly through extreme emotional states to see which key opens the door. During this escalation phase, you will observe jarring, unpredictable shifts in their tone and demeanor within surprisingly short time frames. In a single day or even a single exchange, they might transition from extreme, overt praise and flattering appeals to sudden, exaggerated personal crises, followed immediately by severe threats or heavy guilt trips. They might send a message offering a profound apology or promising massive personal change, and when that fails to elicit a warm response, follow up hours later with an aggressive accusation regarding your coldness or lack of empathy. They may manufacture urgent health concerns, financial emergencies, or administrative chaos that supposedly requires your immediate intervention. The specific content of these messages or behaviors is entirely irrelevant. They are diagnostic probes. Their subconscious is frantically testing your perimeter to see if guilt, nostalgia, fear, pity, or anger can still force an uncontrolled reaction out of you. This erratic boundary testing is driven by an intense underlying anxiety. A manipulator relies on predictability. Their system depends on knowing that pressing button A will yield emotional outcome B from you. When button A yields complete silence or a calm, unshakable refusal to engage, their internal model of control shatters. The erratic behavior is their attempt to force you back into a familiar script. They know that if they raise the emotional stakes high enough or create a situation dramatic enough, the average person's natural instinct is to step in, clarify, correct, de-escalate, or defend themselves. The moment you step in to manage their manufactured crisis or explain why their sudden accusations are unfair, you pass their test. You demonstrate that while their quiet tactics failed, their high-intensity chaos still successfully commands your time, attention, and mental energy. Understanding this desperate escalation requires viewing it as the final spike on a dying line. It is not a demonstration of their power, but a clear sign that they have run out of calculated strategy and are operating out of pure operational panic. They are pulling every lever left on their dashboard because they know that if this wave of chaotic pressure fails to break your stance, they have no remaining options left. When you recognize this rapid cycling for what it is, a frantic diagnostic test rather than a real crisis, you remain grounded in your emotional baseline. By refusing to match their erratic energy, refusing to validate their manufactured emergencies, and holding your calm, firm boundary through the peak of the storm, you completely extinguish the remaining energy driving their operational assault. The ultimate mark of real psychological defeat in a narcissistic dynamic is the complete, abrupt initiation of the ghosting protocol, where indifference is deployed to mask profound shame. Keynote number 5 focuses on this final stage of disengagement, which occurs when a manipulator finally accepts that every operational strategy, third-party maneuver, and desperate attempt at escalation has failed to breach your baseline boundaries. When a narcissist reaches the absolute realization that your emotional state is permanently detached from their control, they do not offer a mature sign-off, a formal acknowledgement of your boundaries, or an attempt to achieve peaceful closure. Instead, they execute a total erasure of the relationship. They step instantly into a state of severe behavioral indifference, acting as though you no longer exist, cutting off contact completely, and removing your presence from their routine as if the connection was never formed in the first place. This sudden turn to complete coldness is often deeply confusing to people who have spent years navigating the relationship. To an outside observer or an unprepared target, this sudden ghosting can look like the narcissist never truly cared, that the target meant nothing all along, or that the narcissist has casually walked away as the victor who got the last word. But when analyzed through a behavioral psychology lens, this absolute indifference is exposed as an emergency coping mechanism designed to cover intense internal shame. A manipulator cannot tolerate the presence of anyone who has seen through their performance and successfully dismantled their leverage. To look at you, interact with you, or even acknowledge your existence is to be confronted with a living mirror of their own powerlessness and failure. Because their fragile self-concept cannot endure that level of psychological discomfort, their system handles the threat by deleting the mirror entirely. During this phase, the ghosting protocol is executed with absolute precision. Phone calls go unanswered, messages remain unread, social media connections are severed or blocked, and shared spaces are avoided entirely. If circumstances force a brief physical overlap, such as in a workplace or shared family environment, they adopt an unblinking gaze that literally looks through you, engaging in zero visual or auditory recognition. This behavior is fundamentally different from a healthy individual setting a personal boundary for peace of mind. A healthy boundary is communicative, transparent, and focused on self-care. The narcissist's ghosting protocol is an aggressive, silent wall erected to protect an exposed core from the unbearable reality of total operational defeat. They treat you as a non-entity, because treating you as a human being would require acknowledging the reality of what just occurred. Understanding this final key sign is what enables you to maintain your victory without slipping back into doubt. The trap at this final stage is allowing your mind to misinterpret their extreme silence as a personal rejection or proof that you failed to make an impact. Manipulators rely on the human desire for relational closure, hoping that their sudden total withdrawal will inflict a final micro wound of feeling unvalued.